Today's video will explain how to develop and use a test runner. Hello, I'm James Helfrich. A unit test is a single method exercising a single test case. But how do you string together a collection of unit tests so you can thoroughly exercise your program? Well, the answer is a test runner. This video will explain how to implement a test runner from scratch or utilize an existing test runner as part of a unit test framework. Usually unit test code is run before the rest of the code of the program through a test runner. So let's see how that works. We always start at main, of course, and main is going to call all the code that's going to execute the program as it normally would. Now the test runner is executed before the rest of the code straight from main, and we execute a function called test runner. And what test runner does, it goes through all the unit test classes. So in this case, it's going to go through test 1, test 2, and test 3, and it will simply execute the run function. Now let's take a look at test class 2. Obviously, that's going to exercise class 2. Now, it's going to have several functions. In this case, subject 1, test 1, subject 2, test 1, and subject 2, test 2. These are going to be 3 individual unit tests. Now, normally, of course, you're going to have more than 3 unit tests, but this is kind of just representative here. So under class 2, apparently we have 2 methods under test. One is subject 1 and one is subject 2. Subject 1 is going to have one test class, and so subject 1 underscore T1 is going to do test case 1 for subject 1. It's going to call that function and get the results back and verify that everything works as expected through asserts. Now we're going to do the same thing with subject 2, except subject 2 is going to have 2 test cases. It's going to have test case 1 as well as test case 2. Hopefully, all the unit tests will exercise every method in the class under test. In this case, class 2's subject 1 and subject 2, as well as the test cases themselves will thoroughly exercise every method under test. Now, I doubt that one test case is going to cover subject 1, unless, of course, it's a trivial function, but this is just representative. So let's take a look at some more detail. So what is exactly the test runner? The test runner just calls the run method for every test class. In this case, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different test classes, obviously for a chess game. Now, we can create our own test runner easily because it's just a simple linear function. But often, unit test frameworks have a user interface allow us to do this in a more convenient way. In this case, this is Visual Studio's Test Explorer. Now, notice that there's 116 individual unit tests, and all of them have passed, and none of them have failed. I can exercise them all at once by hitting the play button, or I can select a given unit test and exercise them one at a time. Now, this extra functionality is nice and convenient and beautiful, but we really need nothing more than just a test runner function. So what exactly does a test class look like? Well, in this case, the test class is going to have a single public method called run and a whole bunch of private methods. These private methods are going to exercise the various methods for the test class. For an example, this is going to exercise method 1, method 2, and method 3, as well as individual test cases, test case ABC, ABC, and ABC. So let's take a look at the pseudocode for our test subject. So test subject.run is simply going to call method 1 test case A, then test case B, then test case C, and so on. So the run method is really, really simple and easy to write. Of course, we have to remember to call the unit test method once we create one. That's really the only step. Now, unit test frameworks often allow a more convenient way to do this, and this is what a Visual Studio unit test looks like in C++. They have these macros for test class and test method, which will automatically add it to the unit test work as well as call it from the run method. And notice how this is going to be part of the Visual Studio C++ unit test framework namespace. Now, the final step is to actually create the unit test, and there's going to be many of them. For the typical class under test, there might be 20, 30, 40 individual unit tests, each one representing a single test case. Now, in this case, I have a position class, and that's the class under test, and there's a set row method, and that's the method under test. And so what am I going to call my unit test? I'm going to call it test position because it's the test class for the position class. Set row is the name of the method because I'm testing set row underscore typical, and this is going to be a typical test case. And of course, I have the setup, exercise, verify, and tear down phase. Now, this is, of course, a pseudocode, but let's see what it looks like in Visual Studio C++ unit test framework. In this case, I'm going to test a knight for the getMoves method, and the test case is called free. So I have that little test method macro that the C++ Visual Studio unit test framework adds to everything. My setup, I'm going to create a knight, put it on the board, exercise and to get the moves and verify that all the moves are exactly what I expect. We can learn more about running unit tests in the test runner section of the unit test chapter of the software design textbook.